That's great. Hi everyone. Yes, so welcome to an amazing new morning. And it is Monday, and we are excited to once again allow ourselves to be once again in that is leading in the office, right? Leading in our generation that has become the office environment to our generation. It is that we allow ourselves this morning to listen to owning our seats with leading that we have discussed during this month, that is going to complete that brings our complete office environment that we are required to have corrected in our generation. It is that we have allowed ourselves to over listen to that is required in our generation. And when I this morning talk about the over listening of what is required in our generation, I really allow ourselves to once again rephrase and to once again find ourselves in that is, how do we listen to what's required in our generation? It is when we listen. I'm gonna this morning focus on the over listening, that is, where do we listen from, right? We all find ourselves in societies during the season in our generation. And with the society that has become one, we are still in that mindset that we have associated ourselves with a certain part of our generation. And with that, I want to focus today on where we listen from and how do we allow ourselves to listen to that's required in our generation. How do we listen? Where do we listen from? And how do we allow ourselves to listen to that's required in our generation? Right? Because when we started the season, we were really starting with that is the listening. When we started this year, we talk about a season, a complete year, right? A complete cycle that you go through. And when we talk about a season with the Vogue and with the Vogue business, we really talk about that is the completeness of what a season represents, right? Of what we have been educated concerning seasons, of how we listen to our seasons in general, how we have learned that when we talk about a season, we don't necessarily talk about the environment only that is the outside environment, but we talk about our life's journey and the education that is a daily education that becomes a season in general. And for our generation, we find ourselves in a season that is, how do we allow ourselves to listen to that's required of us? And we want to focus specifically on that, because we have educated constantly on the Vogue and allowing yourself, right? And when we say allowing yourself, we really allow that is not only someone else's requirement of us, because remember, our generation have been educated to so much answer to that someone else requires of RESTRUCTURING ELISE to do that someone else are doing in season, wear that someone else are wearing in season, right? And in this season, a Vogue business are firmly on that is the self-fact of RESTRUCTURING ELISE in her season, of where I find myself in with the education room that I'm currently in. And that we as women in our generation are being challenged with, right? That we find ourselves being challenged with, that there's so much required of us, but there's so much for us to conform to when it comes to how women find themselves in our generation and how we represent with what's required of us. And therefore allowing ourselves in season to listen to that is the complete you in your season, is allowing yourself to listen to that is the environment that brings the seasons together, that is the outside environment that becomes you in your house, you in your body, the same education that is not meant to be divided, but there is that brings our generation to that oneness of how do we listen, and therefore how do we allow ourselves to listen with what's required of us in our generation. And when I say how do we allow ourselves, I really want to talk about that has become the challenges of our generation, right? when we look at from a political perspective, when we understand and we listen to the political issues that we have on ground floor that humanity has concerning political leaders in our country, right? It is that our everyday people has to learn that the society that we used to associate ourselves with has become that there is one society, that our generation are one society in general, and that our generation therefore would have to allow themselves to listen to not only that is now being educated from a leadership perspective and from a leadership point of view, but with finding that is your requirement to find yourself in where you listen to and how you listen to with what's required for our generation to be in that one house, that is one society. And therefore allowing ourselves to listen is that is now not going to divide you. That way, when you look at political parties, we look at a party at a house that's divided, right? We look at a country that's divided, and we find ourselves constantly in division. And therefore, political leaders have stepped out of that the political party is that, and the political team of political leaders has become that they required our generation to divide themselves amongst one another, but our generation had to constantly educate themselves that we are one house, that our education is one, and that there's really no division amongst our generation and amongst humanity. And therefore, in our season where we are so divided by political parties, that requires us to only interact to that is that specific political party. It is now not only in-house in our countries that it's happening, but it's now international discussions where international political leaders now want to internationally lead the world in that mindset that is division, where they divide our communities and our household and our schools and our education department and our whole society has now become a divided society that is now based on a voting poll, that is now not only a voting poll in our houses, but that has now become our Instagram pages. It is now visible on our Facebook pages. It is visible on our YouTube pages. It is visible on how we communicate concerning one another, and how we interact with what we are being challenged with, and on how we are really representing as a generation in general. And that education to us is an education that when I find myself in a divided house, I find myself 10 years back to where our generation has really already walked from, right? I always say it is fine to be in your yesterday of that, because your yesterday has got all the forgiveness and everything that you are required to have in. But if you are 10 steps back, 10 years back, 100 years back to the abuses that a generation already has gone through, and now it's like the abuse is on another level, and the abuse is now not the same abuse that generations has gone through, but it's now the same apartheid voice, but it's being explained in a different way, because the apartheid is now including the different nationalities. When it comes to the black nationality, to the African nationality, that is now your isiXhosa, your isiZulu, your Sesotho, your different African nationalities that has now also been educated to be divided, because of a generation that wants to lead the world in a divided house, in a house of 50% of people that are privileged and 50% of people that are deprived to be there. And therefore, when we allow ourselves to listen in season, we have to educate ourselves constantly on how do we allow ourselves to listen. I'm therefore going to focus on that, because I want to educate us through our social pages, specifically in our television screens, in our radio stations, and the basic places where education starts at, right? It's one thing for us, we've gone through education years ago, but it's another thing for us if the education room are now required to be a general room for our generation that has not ended when we finish our secondary school year or our university year, but the education room has now advanced into that. There is our television screens, there is our social media pages, and therefore what we educate on there and what we allow ourselves to listen to is where we find ourselves at in such a divided generation. it is that it's easy for us as young people to educate ourselves out of the division, but it is difficult for our older people to find themselves having to let go of those ways that were so depriving and abusive to others, right? Because they have gotten used to that. They've gone through a lot of things that has really been impacted by those challenges that everyone has gone through. But it is that our generation has learned that our society is one, and many years we have been educated that you only associate with this type of, or with this group of people, or with this educated group. When you go to university, only to university group. When you go to this school, you associate only with that type of school people. And when you go to church, you associate only with a church group of people. But now we are discussing that is our complete society in general, because we're gonna have to allow ourselves to walk out of that is depriving one another of where we are required to be at. We are going to have to constantly educate on it, but when we educate, we allow ourselves to listen to, how do we listen to what is the challenge of our generation. It is one thing for everyone to get into the room and to say, RESTRUCTURING, we are all now educators. And then RESTRUCTURING says, we are all educators, yes, and we can all educate on different levels, but it depends on the choices that we make, right? And then people say, but your choices would be church choices. Then RESTRUCTURING says, but there's a generation of people, it's not only church people, and they also want to be educated in their lifestyle choices, because that is going to become the lifestyle choice of someone else, right? And when RESTRUCTURING gets onto a social page and she educates something differently, and she's dressed differently with what she's educating, then she's not educating that one to now accept this way of life. She's educating to different people that are listening to what is it that we are saying in our seasons. And it is therefore easy for us to want to deprive one another of voicing with where we are required to be at. But when we look at such a divided generation, and when we look at all that our generation were exposed to in season and were required to be exposed to, because if we had not known that all these hiddennesses would happen to a generation, then we would not have been able to educate the generation out of it, right? It is that humanity represents that is the leader in the room, that you own that is your every requirement to be fine and to appear, right? You own your business, you own what it is you say, and you own the generation of people that you educate concerning where you are at in your season, right? Because someone else might be entering that education room, and they might require that education that is now not only a school education, that is now not only for the university students, that is now not only for the celebrity house, but the celebrity house are now intertwined with our daily people. In RESTRUCTURING, Elise's voice is now somewhat different, but it's now not gonna divide that. It is a generation in general, that when our generation's group of educators learn that we are not there to say that the educators should only be this representative, but we are there to say that when we educate with that explains a society in its completeness, that understands when a vogue says that we allow a complete season, because our generation would live in the completeness of where we are required to be at, right? Where we are required to find ourselves at in our season. And when we allow ourselves to educate from that is the complete season that someone might be exposed to, and then someone else that are exposed to that is the complete colors of a generation would find themselves fine through the challenges of a generation. Because remember, for us to have learned to accept one another was something totally different. But now when acceptance is in the room, we can't really abuse ourselves while we are in a season that is the completeness that the universe has introduced us to, that is how a generation can look. And if we do not educate with where we find ourselves at, then we might deprive ourselves, or we might deprive someone else of where they are required to be at. That is where when you lead, when you educate in season, you own that you educate. And I'm very firm about it. I'm very firm on my social pages on a Vogue business and a Vogue fashion that is intertwined with one another. People would say I would add the business photos that side, and I would put the fashion photos that side, but our generation are intertwined, right? The two lifestyles are intertwined. When you finish your work on a Friday, there's that you go to the club lifestyle. There's those businesses that are now not only your professional dress businesses, there's your businesses that are going to be your fashion businesses, right? How would you represent them? wear? How would you dress when you are in your fashion industry or in the photography industry or in the entertainment business? It is there that people look and people learn that business is not only that you go to the office with on a Monday morning. No, it has become that is now not an office environment on a Monday, but a dancing club on a Saturday afternoon has become a business for someone else, right? Going to the dance club is a business for a team of people, right? And it is that our office environment is the completeness of our society in general. And that's where I want to focus on, because I've been through the education of it when I was young. And I have to go through the dance clubs and have to learn that our society is exactly that. It is not going to be me going to the office on a Monday and I might never have been exposed to the dance club and I might never learn that that's also an office environment for people. And then sometimes when I find that I'm only in that mindset that an office environment only needs to look a certain way, then I might deprive myself of where I'm required to be at. And that's where the education in our generation should be accepted in the complete of where our generation finds itself at, so that we are not abused and not deprived of where we are required to be at. We never argue the voice and the force of this universe. We never argue it back. We allow ourselves to listen, and we allow ourselves to be fine when we listen to the education of our generation and of our generation with where we are being educated at in our seasons. So when it comes to how do we listen, I want to focus on the fact that listening has become that involves a lot of environments, right? Listening has become that involves a lot of challenges that people went through. Listening has become that comes with the atmosphere that someone else sends a message and someone else has to listen to it. It is that listening requires us to learn how to listen to what it is that we are being educated and where we are being educated at in a season. It is that it's easy for us to listen to someone's opinion, right? And especially when we go on social pages. My daughter's in the house, so forgive, she might move around a bit because it's amazingly school vacation, yes. So she's in the house, so she might make a little bit of a noise, but that's all fine. So when we listen, we have to allow ourselves to learn to know how to listen to what's required of us to do. It is so easy for our generation to find themselves, because we have had the education of social media that we are all very excited about, and the education of television, the radio stations. We have had all the entertainment industries that now not only has to entertain but has to educate our generation, right? But we have learned that the entertainment industry can also sometimes be one-sided, right? That a page like an Instagram page can also sometimes be one-sided when it comes to who they want to have represent in a generation, right? Why one-sided? Because mainly your owners on your social pages, the owners of Instagram would maybe be Joe Biden and his team of political leaders, right? The owner of Facebook would maybe be another political leader from another country. And the owner of television would maybe be another political leader, right? And only because of that, the education and they can sometimes be one-sided and can sometimes have that we have to allow ourselves to be educated, that not everything that everyone educates you on a social page is what you have to accept in your season, right? Because remember, if we accept everything and to have everything in one house, how much confusion can that bring to a generation in general, right? And only therefore we are required to remind ourselves that in our households, our parents educated us that this is the requirements to abide to that is right and wrong, right? We grew older, we learned that right and wrong to everyone is different, because now I'm in a school, and in this school, right to that person means this, and left to And left to that person means that, and right and wrong becomes even that in a generational road that is a life journey, right? It becomes one, right? The two intertwines with one another, and sometimes the road becomes that is depriving, that is depressive, that is different to your household upbringing, because now the road includes that intertwinement, right? And when we have our social pages and we have to educate our generation on social pages, but when we educate our generation, are being educated to accept differently and to listen to the division in concerning our generation, then it is that you have to allow yourself to be educated on how do you then listen to that requirement that then brings our generation back to that is the one house of our generation. It is that a social media business owner can be Joe Biden and his parliamentary leaders. The Facebook business owner can exactly be that, and they can exactly input information and allow people that is exactly going to be as one-sided as some of our political leaders are, because they are political leaders. And therefore, that one-sided mindset in education has become like a fostering place for them, right? But when we educate ourselves out of that, and we learn to listen to that's your requirement to apply the right from wrong based on your upbringing, based on where you find yourself at in your country, based on your country's challenges, based on what your country might be exposed to, and then therefore having to find that there is a protective environment for everyone, and when no one feels depressed, when no one feels abused because of the choices that they make, but where your country understand and accept the choices that you make as a human being. It is that social media brings us into that international environment, but when we're in that international mindset, we should not exclude our countries that we find ourselves at. We should not exclude the challenges that our countries has. We should not exclude what we might be exposed to in our countries, and we should not exclude our environment that's required to be a protective environment in general for everyone, right? And when you find yourself in that, then you find yourself in having to abide to that and having to apply that. That is, how do you listen to what you are required to listen to in your season? It becomes a baby that you nurture, right? And that baby is you exactly. It is you finding yourself, finding your season. But that baby is exactly the choices that we make, the opportunity of choice that life gives us, and that we do not disregard ourselves away from, and we do not disown ourselves. We educate this week and this season with about that ownership, right? You do not disown yourself of where you are required to be. When we update the Vogue photos, then they gave us that moment, that photo, and that moment, that photo, and then the hair is like that, and then I'm like, no, but my hair is like this today. And sometimes I allow because you allow that. But sometimes you have to learn who is behind the scenes that are trying to deprive you from where you are required to be at with voicing for your business. Because remember, someone else reading in is not gonna have the same mindset of the person who's behind the scenes, who's sending me the photos through, that when I take a photo, then it's like people are constantly in the room and they're constantly trying to update my photos, and I constantly have to send a photo to say, but this is how I'm looking today, right? And then they constantly try and update that. And then sometimes I leave it and I allow it, and I allow them to speak, because they're also educating me something, right, about what I'm saying in my business. And sometimes I have to allow myself to listen to me in that whole post, because that whole post can be so disruptive to someone else who really now wants to follow the journey, and then they are disrupted with a photo that looks different, right? And when you are disrupted, the celebrities have educated themselves to just go on with the journey and to not allow themselves to tell themselves that is now not them in the photo, but to just continue with the photo that to the process of educating. But sometimes the process can sometimes be disruptive when you are on a journey with educating someone, and constantly you are distracted, with where you are required to be at, and that sometimes bring a divided generation that is now going to be divided with opinion based on what a Vogue business stands for. And that doesn't only happen with my page. I believe there's a lot of people that nowadays take photos and the next photo comes through and it's something totally different, right? Sometimes we have a good laugh about it and we allow the season, and other times it's disruption, because when you are on a journey and you really want to focus on your representing your fashion voice, and someone else disrupt the photo, and then sometimes it's abusive. manipulative, but we have allowed ourselves not to aggress ourselves about it, because we have been educated. The celebrities went through that and they find it challenging, but they continue their journey of education, because such is life. It's going to be disruptive many days, and that's what the viewer behind the scenes wants to educate us, who's doing the business, right? They want to educate us that your business is sometimes gonna be interrupted, and then you would have to educate yourself to even accept that, and people would even learn to accept one another with how we educate, and to not so easily give up on someone who educates in the education room. And that is when it comes to owning your season, and our light is giving a problem already. And when it comes to how do we listen in our season, and when we allow ourselves to listen to that, there is gonna now not be an aggressive environment or not an angry environment, then we allow ourselves to listen with that completeness of our society in general, of accepting that we are required to listen to, and that we are required to change in our generation. It is therefore that we take ownership of where we find ourselves at, but we educate ourselves to listen to that is going to be non-abusive, non-depriving, and non-manipulative concerning the education of our generation in general. It is that when we have to make a choice to listen on social media, it is how do you listen to that? Do you listen with anger? Do you listen with abuse? Do you listen to stir aggression or do you listen with accepting where our generation finds themselves at? And therefore, when we learn how to listen, we learn to accept where we are listening from and the challenges of our generation. And we therefore allow ourselves to be fine throughout those challenges, right? It is that I always say that when you are corrupt, don't do that again, right? When you are manipulative, don't manipulate people again. We accept our generation in general, but our generation don't have to abuse one another. I always say it's fine to tell one another that we have to accept that there's gonna be wars and bombings and things happening in our generation, but we do not abuse the education of that, right? Those educations could have been educated even in a different way, and the environment would have still been protective. I always say that when it happens, and it has been allowed, then we listen to that has happened. But we do not now want people to also now go and stir and say, but now we are required to educate that, because RESTRUCTURING says you're not required to even educate in that way, because our generation do not have to deprive themselves of having to be fine with where they are required to be at. We do not require people to educate ourselves that corruption is something that we have to be fine with. No, we do not have to teach our people that those who have corrupted us has done something good. No, we teach ourselves that the protective environment of that is to really allow ourselves to not abuse one another and to not deprive one another, and to allow that education that is also a protective environment for our generation and for any generations. Because remember, the stirring that we make in our generation is a stirring that might happen in the next generation. And therefore, applying that right from wrong, allowing ourselves to listen to that is going to be non-abusive and non-aggressive way of listening, and really educating that based on the choices that we make. What is it that you are going to post? Are we going to stir aggression? Are we really educating in our business, or are we really abusing our generation? And some of our people, political leaders, really know that they are really corrupting our generation, really know that they are involved in women abuse, really know that they are involved in children kidnapping. They really know that they are really abusing our generation, and then they still educate and then people still cheer that on. And some people really know that these political leaders are involved in all of these abuses, because sometimes it is so clear that the things that some people do are so clear that they don't even hide the abuses that they are busy with. And when people cheer that on, then I really advise those people to not even complain in our generation. When you are a person that cheers a political leader on that is involved in women abuse, women kidnapping, children abuse, children kidnapping, if you are in that type of group in our generation that are educating in that are really accepting that, then I really advise you to not complain in our generation, to not complain about anyone else who's doing sometimes the same thing that political leader are doing. Another thing that I want to talk about is 3 vocabulary words or 4 vocabulary words, right? The word sustainability sustainability, the word value, and what's the other word? There's a few words that the mafias use nowadays on television, and the mafia groups exactly talk in that way. And I have really educated our people of color group outside of that way of speaking, right? I always say that when you speak on television, you speak with what you are being told to say, what you are meant to say, not what the mafia told you to say. What you, when you hear within yourself, what does the inner voice tell you to say? You don't come and speak to us on television about sustainability and the value. You value a piece of meat, right? Nowadays they kidnap children, they value it, and then they weigh it off, and then they send it onto countries. And many political leaders are nowadays speaking in that way. And for those group of political leaders who's involved in those businesses, who's busy with those mafia talks, who has those talks on our television, those words are exactly signals that they give on to next countries. Because nowadays they can't send messages anymore. Nowadays they can't send the Instagram anymore because the police are really following track on these guys. And now they are trying to allow us to accept those ways of speaking. That is exactly when they go and weigh something down. Remember the argument that women had in the year 2021 about equality, right? The word equality. And that was an implementation of this mafia group of people that only speak in a certain way. They can't even speak properly anymore. When they talk on television, it's the whole time got to do with value and sustainability. And those words, they constantly mention it. And we don't get a grace with it, but what we require of our television people to do is to really educate our leaders to speak in a proper way, to not speak with sending hashtag messages on from one country to the next country, right? It is that we're going to require our television teams and our entertainment teams to not go and abuse our generation further, because there are teams of people that are monitoring these things. But it is that our generation learns to own and to take ownership of the ways that we are speaking and of what it is that we are saying. And I really know that I can speak very, very firm and aggressive sometimes, and really forgive me for that. But honestly, sometimes we have to educate our generation out of that you accept that way because you think someone else is saying something totally different. And let me tell you, they are not saying something totally different. They are speaking in a mafia way, and they are giving hashtag signals to countries to abuse one another. And the hashtag signals is exactly the word sustainability, the word value, the word balance it out. Those are all the hashtag messages that they send from country to country. And therefore, when we the listeners listens in, we exactly listen to those type of messages. And our police and our investigators should be exactly firm with people who speak and educate in that way, because that has become an abusive way. That when our generation was arguing about men and women issues and about equality issues, then those words of value and sustainability and the balancing it out of it came all become part of the woman that has been kidnapped and abused. And when people on our television screens are going to speak like that, our police and our investigators should really be firm with education, people, because someone has spoken about it again this morning, and we are not going to allow that way of speaking. I know on Al Jazeera television, they always speak like that sometimes. There's different groups on Al Jazeera that manage every week a different group of people. And there's a group of people that manages, and that week that group manages, they exactly speak that way. And we really, really do not appreciate that way. If they want to send messages and if they want to in those lifestyles, they should do it in their own houses, and they keep themselves most firm to do that. Then they should do that in their own ways and through their social pages. Do not abuse our viewers, and do not abuse our social media, television screens, because those messages goes to people's houses. And people tuning in onto Al Jazeera becomes targets exactly of that. Remember, I've educated our Facebook team through that in the year 2021. I've educated our Facebook people through that. When people are tuned into your house, it is exactly the same with television. They exactly sometimes speak directly to you who have switched the television on. And therefore, in this season of allowing ourselves, we need to educate our generation out of that is abusive. And we need to educate our generation with that. That is the question of how do we allow ourselves to listen to what is it that is required in our generation. It has become that is not only your office environment, but there is the RESTRUCTURING, ELISE, the individual person's lifestyle, in the individual person in the discussion room. It is there that our business restructuring is our ways of educating. It is our leaderships. It is our ways that we educate in our generation that has become a business in general, that has become every part of the individual's lives. And therefore, let us allow ourselves to educate that is non-abusive and that is protective with where any generation are required to be at. Do not be distracted by the lots of things that are happening in our generation, but educate yourselves out of that you become part of that is also abusive. Because remember, if a team of people works already with that team of leadership that really is firm and wanting to abuse and oppress our generation, then it's still challenging to still go and educate y'all again. If y'all already has learned that we do not accept that is gonna abuse our one another, but we accept that there is the oneness. We do not accept abuse in our generation, but we accept the completeness of our generation in general, of that one approach, that the left hand and the right hand becomes one part of one function. And if our generation learns to listen to that they allow themselves to listen to, then they won't be going on to speak on aggression, right? So someone else can argue with you and say, but yes, the word value, I would want to use it in any sentence. Then if the person realizes that the word value is involved in argument and they argue back with you, why would they want to aggress the house that are listening again? And that's where our generation says, no one is stupid, but honestly, the question is so firm. Why would you, if you are an educator or you are representing on television and you know the word value is an aggression word and it stirs aggression and it's linked to aggressive arguments in our generation, then why would you want to use that word in your sentence when there's so many words that we can use to bring our sentences and to bring our generation to that is non-abusive? And therefore, with saying that is us for this Monday with HR2023 business restructuring and RESTRUCTURING ELISE. Let us not get it wrong. Our business restructuring involves the completeness of the education in our generation. It involves that the person who educates concerning the everyday challenges is going to be the person that would be in the business. The business would then be that recruits new people on a daily basis, and the new people would even be educated, that when they move to the next business, they would even go and educate that, and it becomes our society in general. So how do we listen? Where is it that we listen from, and how do we allow ourselves to listen, right? We listen from that becomes non-aggressive, that if I know the word value and sustainability is a mafia word, and I continue on to use it on my pages, then I myself still aggression, right? Because if I realize that RESTRUCTURING said that those words are linked to that, and now I go and educate on that, then I am that part of a generation that now stirs aggression, because I now realize that is a part of our generation's way of speaking and of giving a hashtag signal. And therefore, where do we listen from? And how do we allow ourselves to listen? Over listening is that you have listened and you have learned that is now a grace word, and now you somehow want to go and use that word in so many vocabularies. Yes, sometimes we want to use it to educate our generation out of it, but do not use it to become part of that divides our generation. Because remember, our political leaders all have people inside our countries that works for them, that receives a monthly salary based on being employed for political leader mafia groups, right? So therefore, everyone within our generation listens differently. And when on television screens and radios we educate in that way, then we stir aggression in our countries. And why would we then want to stir aggression? So therefore, over listening is that you have learned that the situation is this, and you over listen by wanting to go and even explain that you are part of this and you are not disagreeing, and that becomes that you overdo concerning a situation. So do not be an over listener in our generation. An over listener becomes that they know the situation is that, they pretend they didn't hear that, they over listen and they want to go and educate that is exactly abuse, and that is not acceptable, right? We do not accept that abuse in any way in our generation. And therefore, We allow ourselves not to be over listeners. We learn to know how to listen, where to listen from, not from angry environments, not from aggression, not from political arguments, not from all of those votingnesses, this political party and that political party. We learn to know how do we allow ourselves to listen to that. That is our society's voice in general, that becomes non-abusive, that becomes one generation in general, and many generations to move onward and to allow ourselves to be part of. It is that nothing ever is in vain in any generation, and every education within a generation becomes part of next generations, right? And that is where we are at today with RESTRUCTURING+RIBEA, ELISE, with saying a lot and with saying it without having a pause to it, because remember, we do not want to oversay, but we do not want to be oppressed with not saying what we are required to say. That is it for today. And for me, with our discussion of HR 2023 business restructuring with RESTRUCTURING+RIBEA, ELISE. Have an amazing week further.